I've picked out a number of different topics today for the programme, and I think because of the lack of news about any kind of constitutional issues in Scotland, we need to look at other things. Now, one of the first things I often look at is defence spending in the UK. And one of the best places actually to find out what the United Kingdom is planning to do with its defence spending is actually to read the United Kingdom Defence Journal, which is their sort of in-house magazine for everything to do with the armed forces. An article I saw today says that the United Kingdom is intending to purchase more F-35 jet fighters from the United States. Now, the F-35 jet fighter is widely acknowledged to be the most expensive jet fighter ever developed because it's fantastically complex. It's a stealthy airplane. It's capable of vertical landings and short takeoffs, which makes it ideal for aircraft carriers. So the United Kingdom had originally planned to buy 138 of these aircraft, and initially it looked as though they were only going to buy about 30 or 35 of them to begin with, and they have already done so, and that's produced the first squadron, which is normally positioned on the HMS Queen Elizabeth, the main, or the first of the two main new aircraft carriers. As I've reported over the years, these two aircraft carriers cost something in the region of £2 billion each. But what's interesting about the new information coming from the Ministry of Defence is that they intend to not only buy some more of these F-35 fighters, they're planning to increase the number to 78, or order a further 78 of them, and eventually complete the third tranche of the order, which will in essence allow the United Kingdom to have 138 of these stealth fighter aircraft. Now, this does give them a tremendous capability because these aircraft are stealthy and they can sneak around without being spotted on radar very easily, and they can take off and land from aircraft carriers. They are uniquely capable. The problem is that the cost of them is such that I calculate that if they buy all 138 of these aircraft, it's actually going to cost the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defence about 4.8 to 5 billion pounds for just the aeroplanes. And that's actually, the aeroplanes are going to cost more than the ships that they sit on. However, having 138 of these aircraft allows the UK to create a third squadron. Now, the third squadron might well be land-based, since the aircraft carriers will pretty much have a full complement by then, and also the aircraft carriers will carry helicopters as well, so they're not just carrying the jet fighters. The problem I've already mentioned many times before is that if nothing else, the Ukrainian war with Russia has proved one thing, and that is that existing steel surface vessels that are massive and slow and sit on the surface of the ocean are very, very easy for enemy combatants to actually counter, and the Ukrainians have proved this just simply by using robot drones, simply powerboats packed with explosives, which are driven remotely using satellite linkages from a safe shelter back at base. And in using swarms of these, they found that the Russian battle fleet in the Black Sea had no real effective defense against them, although they could shoot at them with short-range weapons, such as large-caliber machine guns from the deck of the ships. They didn't really have any kind of way of spotting them. They didn't really show up on radar because they're so small. They're so fast and maneuverable, it's very hard to hit them. And of course, they are protected by bulletproof surfaces to protect them from being shot by the very machine guns, which the Russians have attempted to use to defend themselves. But it's meant that the Russians have lost something like approaching 20% of their surface fleet, and that's without another navy being anywhere near them. And if nothing else, that's giving us a warning that investing in massive surface ships, which are gigantic, I mean, the aircraft carriers that the United Kingdom possesses are over 400, nearly 500 feet long. They're enormous targets. They show up on radar very easily, and despite the advanced weaponry that their aircraft have, unless these aircraft get off the carrier quickly before it's detected, they're likely to go down with the ship if it's hit by a drone, or drones, because it would probably take several of them to sink such a large vessel. So the UK is planning to spend £4.8 billion over the lifespan of the aircraft carriers to fit them out with enough aircraft to be a credible threat. This, they say, is in response to the increased threat from Russia in its aggressive stance in Europe, and it is expected that the United Kingdom will start to beef up its armed forces, despite the fact that it has very little money left to do so. And the other news today, of course, you'll have seen in the papers, if you've been paying attention, is that the much derided Hate Crime Act in Scotland has already attracted over 3,000 reported hate crimes to Police Scotland. Now, I calculated that if that happened on a single day, and assuming that that trend continued throughout the year, you would have over 1 million reported hate crimes going into Police Scotland every year. Now, I know that's a completely massive overestimate of what would really happen, and I think we can safely say that a large proportion of these are probably malicious. I'd be willing to bet you that somebody has reported J.K. Rowling, for one thing, and maybe a few other politicians and others who might have made comments, such as Murdo Fraser, who claimed that he could self-identify as a cat and is worried that he might be arrested by Police Scotland for hate crime. Now, much as I hate the idea of Murdo Fraser, I don't think you could really class thinking of yourself as a cat, even if it's false, as being any sort of a hate crime, unless you hate cats. But it just goes to show you how ridiculous this law is. Now, I notice also that Alba has put about a new petition, which is asking or demanding the repeal of this legislation, because it's unworkable, because the police are going to be overloaded, their switchboards and their computers are probably going to be swamped with both malicious and genuine claims of racial abuse or domestic abuse, whatever it is. But interestingly, domestic abuse and misogyny against women is not covered under this legislation. Nobody really knows why that is. But it seems to me that the idea of the Hate Crime Act is largely being rubbished daily, not just by the unionist press, but by many other Scots who see this legislation as unnecessary, as far too vague, and basically gives far too much latitude for abuse of the system, which means that the police will become overloaded with ridiculous claims of hate crimes, which are obviously not hate crimes. And then amongst that, there will be genuine hate crime victims who are trying desperately to get the attention of the police and the lawmakers and to get their case heard in a court, but can't because of all the crap that's going on round about them by those who wish this act ill. Now, I'm one of those people who was against this act in the first place. I don't mind telling you that, because I believed it was unnecessary and it wasn't accurately enough targeted in order to actually provide any meaningful increase in the protection of people against hate crimes, specific hate crimes. And I think the definition is what needs to be tightened up before any of this type of legislation is put into force. The police have been forced, perhaps against their will, by the Scottish Government to start trying to enforce this law. Now, how do they filter it? Who knows? Where do you start? You have to look at the evidence that's presented to you. And just simply claiming that somebody said something nasty about you on social media is hardly really a hate crime. It's just simply annoying, and perhaps people have been offensive to you or have mocked you online. That happens to me on a daily basis. If I reported every single troll that did that, I would be here all day and would never get a programme out. Anyway, I think that the Hate Crimes Act of 2024 is likely to die off eventually, because I think it's going to be proved to be unworkable. The more it is swamped with spurious reports like this, the more chance there is the real hate crimes are going to slip through under the radar in amongst all the garbage that is being generated. And in doing this, whoever is maliciously making these claims is wrecking the chances of anyone who really is suffering from abuse, who really is being the victim of a hate crime. They're not going to get their cases heard in court. So something needs to be done before this gets any worse, and I see the writing on the wall for the Hate Crime Act already, and before it's even gone very far. The idea of 3,000 claims in 24 hours is utterly incredible, and probably 90% of these are bogus or malicious in some way. So there needs to be some way of filtering all that out. Otherwise, the police are just going to be wasting their time daily trying to figure out what's real and what isn't. And at the moment, they don't really have a method for doing that. Now, in answer to a question posed by a couple of people who contacted me directly, somebody said, what happens to Scottish independence, or the possibilities of it, if the United Kingdom were to shut Holyrood down? It's a good question, but the simple answer to it is not very much, because the United Kingdom actually runs the Scottish Parliament. It's their Parliament. It's their devolution. And anyone who is elected to office in the Scottish Parliament or elected as an MSP is basically bound by the rules of the United Kingdom's Parliamentary Act, which is the Scotland Act 1998, as amended, and that is what sets up devolution as a British power. It's not a Scottish power. So even if Holyrood was closed right down, it would not affect our ability in any way to hold a referendum, because we already can't hold a referendum using our own parliament. That's already been established through Nicola Sturgeon referring the matter through the Lord Advocate to the United Kingdom Supreme Court, who basically said no, the Scottish Parliament cannot be used in order to generate legislation that would lead to a binding referendum. Now, of course, there is the potential at the moment for the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, to actually call for another Section 30 order. He has said, and the SNP's position in the upcoming election is that a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence, and that if they win the majority of seats, that is in Westminster in the first past the post, if they win a majority of seats, then they will begin negotiations with the United Kingdom. They'll draw up a new constitution, and they will send somebody to Brussels as an envoy seeking the support of the international community in Scotland's support. The problem with all of this is that at the end of an interview recently on the BBC, Mr. Yousaf was forced to admit that he was still thinking he would have to apply or ask for or demand a Section 30 order, which tells me that we are still stuck with the so-called Sturgeon doctrine, which is that the gold standard of democratically arrived at independence is for Scotland to seek a Section 30 order from the United Kingdom, which would then decide on what the rules were for the referendum, what the conditions were, how much power this referendum would have. And remember, the referendum that would be agreed, if ever Richie Sunak decided to give us a Section 30 order, the one condition that the UK would apply to that would be that it is an informational referendum only. It carries no power, it does not self-execute, doesn't result in independence. It can be ignored or deferred, delayed for as long as the United Kingdom feels like it. So the answer to the question, and what would happen if Holyrood were to close, how would we gain our independence, is largely none. There wouldn't be any real effect, because we would still have to organise our own referendum from the ground up. We can't use our parliament or our parliamentarians or our traditional political parties, because they are all acknowledging the sovereignty of the United Kingdom Parliament in London over the Parliament in Edinburgh. So the Parliament in Edinburgh is basically the local branch of the British government here in Scotland, and it only deals with devolved matters which are internal to Scotland only, and even at that they are likely to be changed. In other words, the British government is likely to try to directly fund local authorities. Now, you may have heard Sir Keir Starmer recently saying that if Labour is elected as the next the next government of the United Kingdom, then he would introduce what he called full-fat devolution. Now, that might sound terrific. You might think, oh, brilliant! Scotland's going to get, maximum devolution. We might be able to get all sorts of powers. But no, that's not really what he's talking about. What Starmer is talking about is devolving power to local authorities in England, so that the responsibility for basically spending money in local authorities is devolved to things like locally elected mayors or Tory-led administrations or Labour-led administrations at the local level. But it doesn't involve any extra powers for the Scottish Parliament. In fact, it involves quite the reverse. He's even talking about directly funding local authorities from central government in London, anywhere in the UK, including Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And that would be removing some of the devolved powers of the Scottish Parliament straight away. And it would basically make devolution pointless, because you would be affecting London control over a local authority without passing through the devolved administration in any way at all. So I think we could say that they could close Holyrood down tomorrow and nobody would notice the difference, because the funding would still go to the local authorities. It would just be decided by whoever it is who lives in number 10 Downing Street, rather than our elected and, let's face it, vastly overpaid MSPs in Holyrood. So the question really is, what do we do if we can't hold a referendum by the usual political means, by using Holyrood to do so and by using our MSPs to do so? Well, the answer to that is we'd have to do it ourselves. And this is why Salvo exists, and this is why Liberation Scotland exists, and this is why we need a citizen organisation with which we can actually make representations in Brussels on behalf of the people of Scotland, rather than the political parties who are beholden to Westminster. Because I know that we can never get what we're looking for from any political party which admits or acknowledges that the United Kingdom makes the rules for our Parliament. And so nothing will very much change. If they closed Holyrood down tomorrow, it would become another historic monument in Scotland, another failure of Scotland to actually take control of its own resources, its own powers. And remember that we've always had the right to vote on our own self-determination. That's written into the UN Charter. And so everything that Salvo and Liberation Scotland are proposing to do is to fulfill that human right, that basic, universal, global human right to self-determination. Means that we can hold a referendum of our own, but we need to seek some help from the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, probably the Council of Europe, the European Union, and many other international organisations which deal with the application of international law. Now, you might be scoffing at this and saying, well, the International Court of Justice has made all sorts of pronouncements and nothing has changed. They can't stop the genocide that's going on in Gaza at the moment, or the accidental killing of civilians and airstrikes. All of that goes on despite all the warnings and all of the deliberations of these courts. But on the other hand, we are not talking about ending a war here. We're talking about the right of an entire nation to decide on its own future. And that comes down to the people, because going back as far as 1310, in the Declaration of the Clergy, they specified that the people of Scotland choose their king based on their consent, not on hereditary entitlement. And therefore, the people of Scotland since 1310 have always had the sovereignty necessary to remove any government or any monarch who wasn't protecting their rights, or who might bring them under the control of the English government. And so the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320 reinforced that still further, and outlined what the people would do if King Robert the Bruce decided that he was going to throw in his lot with Edward II and bring Scotland back under English jurisdiction. They would boot him out and make some other guy a king. So Scotland and the Scots have always had this right. It's still in the statute books. It was then codified, in other words, it was then made official in the Claim of Right Act of 1689. And in that, it was specified that that right was universal for all Scots. We had that authority. We could choose who ruled us. And right at the moment, we're not choosing who rules us at all. We're accepting overlordship from somewhere else. So we've always got the right. Doesn't matter if they shut Holyrood down. What matters is that we get together, we join forces, we join up with organisations such as Salvo and Liberation Scotland, And we make these representations to these international bodies. We send our own delegation to argue the facts. We take our legal documents, the statutes of Scotland that are still in our laws that prove this right, and we have our own self-executing referendum. In other words, it results in independence. It doesn't just advise the local government or the UK government or the Scottish Parliament. It is self-executing. And so in that regard, there wouldn't be any difference. Anyway, so in the round today, United Kingdom is planning to spend almost as much, again, on the aircraft or the aircraft carriers as they did on the aircraft carriers themselves. And in the meantime, the Hate Crimes Act, I think, has been largely nobbled and is probably going to be quietly repealed, because unless something happens to change the way that hate crime is actually described and specified in this act, I can't see it working. I think the police are probably going to say, look, we can't deal with this. You need to repeal this and start over, because this is just wasting time and millions of pounds for nothing, and it's too easy for the enemies of the bill to sabotage it. For my money, it's probably better, if you want to oppose this bill, do so in a civilised way. Probably the best thing to do is sign a petition. And when the petition gets enough signatures, it has to be actioned. It has to be actioned in Holyrood, and that could result in the repeal of this legislation until something better can be formulated. I'm not saying that it's entirely a bad idea. I like the idea of a Hate Crimes Act. I just think that this does not focus tightly enough on what hate crimes are. And misogynistic hatred of women seems to have been left off the list. And that is something that really needs to be fixed before we go any further. Anyway, those are the topics for today. Thank you for watching the program all the way through. I will be back again later on in the week. I will also be posting or reposting the PayPal link, which helps me to support my work on this channel. But you can also help by first of all, liking the video, subscribing to the channel. That helps the algorithm recognize that you like the content and will make it available to more people to watch online. I've also made sure that these videos are now available to anyone in the public who searches for them. They're not restricted in any way, so you should be able to see me much more easily. Anyway, that's it from IndeCar today. As I always say, keep the faith. Remember that we're the ones who are sovereign, not the politicians. And as far as aircraft carriers are concerned, I think when Scotland becomes independent, aircraft carriers are going to be a thing of the past. We're going to look at what the Ukrainians did to protect themselves from naval fleets and take some lessons from the reality of that war. That's it from me today. I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.